23 years ago this week, on August 8th, 1998, Jay Leno headlined a WCW pay-per-view. No, that really happened. Jay Leno, the host of The Tonight Show, tagged with Diamond Dallas Page in a match against Hollywood Hogan and Eric Bischoff at WCW's Road Wild pay-per-view from the Sturgis Motorcycle Rally in South Dakota, which, as I speak, is ongoing right now, with more than 700,000 attendees expected. This was a month after Goldberg won the world title and was relegated to second fiddle behind Hogan and Rodman at the Bash at the Beach show. Now he was playing second fiddle here against Hogan, and this time Jay Leno. Goldberg was playing second fiddle to Jay Leno, who was somehow less of an embarrassment in this match than Dennis Rodman was the month before. Although the visual of Hulk Hogan selling for a Jay Leno standing arm wringer is pretty fucking embarrassing, as were the punches, and I do use that word loosely, that Leno was throwing at Bischoff. Bischoff said this on his 83 Weeks podcast about how this whole thing came together and pitching Leno on the idea, not only to do the match, but for him and Hogan to take over an episode of The Tonight Show, shoot this big angle to sell the match. This is what Bischoff said on his podcast. I said, "Would you wrestle?" And he goes, "Yeah, I'll wrestle." So I said, "Let me go back home and think about this for a day or two, and I'll come up with an idea that would make sense. But let me come up with something different that would really get this ball rolling, because we didn't have a lot of time. This was 1st of July, and the pay-per-view was August 8th. So it's not like we had weeks and weeks to figure this out." So I go home and I think about it, and I go, what if Hulk Hogan and I take over The Tonight Show? What if we take Jay Leno and Kevin Eubanks, the guy that had the band? What if we throw him off the set? And what if we do it like the NWO would do, where it feels real and believable? There's no comedy, there's nobody who's going to laugh. This is the exact opposite of what anybody watching The Tonight Show would ever expect. I thought if I could sell that to Jay Leno, I could sell anything. I'm talking about throwing the host of one of the most watched, most successful shows in the history of television off his set and take over his desk. I went back to LA and Jay went, "That's awesome, we can make this work." And I say, look, in order for this to work, it's late night comedy talk, but what we're about to do is not late night comedy talk. It's going to throw people off, so you need to know that and expect that. Secondly, in order for this to work for WCW, there can be no laughing. We can't be tongue-in-cheek here. It's got to feel as real and as believable as it can. Otherwise, if it's hee ha ha and everybody gets the tongue-in-cheek joke, it'll be good for The Tonight Show, but it won't be good for WCW. Your security cannot know. Make sure the ones with the guns are somewhere else. But the security cannot know. And Jay, you've got to take this seriously. The minute you crack a smile, the minute you show your teeth, it'll ruin everything. So they agreed, and we pulled it off. And they did shoot an angle. It was a major angle on The Tonight Show. And Hogan came out, Bischoff came out, Hogan gave Jay a shove. There was this pull apart, security came out, and for a while there, when they came back from break, Hogan was in the guest chair, Bischoff was in the host chair, and so you had probably however many million people were watching The Tonight Show back then, 3 or 4 million people who were watching this, and a lot of them probably aren't even wrestling fans. They're going, what is this shit? What am I watching here? Where's Jay? But for them to take over the show like that is a very big deal. And then eventually Leno came back out with his security people, and they took Bischoff away. They took Hogan away. DDP came out. He attacked Hogan. And, DDP is standing on stage with Jay Leno, and he says, "What do you think if you and I team up to take on these two guys?" I mean, you watch the segment back. I found it on YouTube, because it's hard to find it now. But you watch it back. It is very cringe. It's a very cringy segment now to go back and watch. But this was still a big coup for WCW. I mean, The Tonight Show is a television institution, or at least it used to be. It was the #1 show in late night. And Bischoff convinced Leno to effectively let him take it over for a night. So that was a big deal. But they didn't trust Leno at the end of the match to hit Bischoff with a diamond cutter for the finish. So they had Leno's band leader, Kevin Eubanks, who was in their corner that night. He did the Diamond Cutter instead, and Leno got the pin on Bischoff. Goldberg came back out with his belt. Got to make sure you get the belt in the photo. He came back out to make the save as the NWO was teasing that they were going to beat up Jay Leno after the match. They did this so that they could get a photo up in the papers and on the news the next day of Goldberg with the belt, with Leno. It was smart the way that they worked it. It was smart of them to try to do it that way, but it was a failure. Once the buy rate came in, they had just over 300,000 buys for this pay-per-view. And you could talk about all the publicity they got from the angle on TV. If it did not generate buys, which was the lifeblood, this is years and years and years before, companies like this were being sustained just by television money. WWE doesn't even do traditional pay-per-view anymore. And even if they did, that's not where they make their most money. They make their money from TV. So the pay-per-views, they don't mean what they used to mean back then. Back then, television ratings and pay-per-view were very important. And so whatever publicity they may have gotten from their little stunt on The Tonight Show, if it didn't generate buys, then it was a failure. Which is what this was. Especially because they already weren't making any money off the Sturgis show because there was no gate. They made nothing. It was a bunch of motorcycles who just pulled up to watch the show. They weren't charging money for tickets. They made $0 on the gate. At least you would make your money on pay-per-view, and they could barely do that for this show. They did a lot better with Rodman, even though that match was worse. Jay Leno didn't quite pack the punch at the box office that the NBA players did. This was also the show, by the way, where Chris Jericho and Juventud Guerrera wrestled for the Cruiserweight title with Dean Malenko as the guest referee. This is the match that the AEW announcers referenced on Wednesday night on Dynamite during the Jericho Juventud match here in 2021. Their match in 98 was far better. 19 years ago this week, on August 7th, 2002, NWA TNA held its 8th weekly pay-per-view from the Asylum in Nashville. And Ron Killings made history in the second match on the card. It wasn't even the main event. Defeating Ken Shamrock to become the first and to this day the only recognized African-American NWA World Heavyweight Champion. He had signed with TNA after his run as K-Quick came to an end in WWE, and he rebranded himself as Ron the Truth Killings. He was the truth, as in, it's the truth that the powers that be were avoiding giving me a title match because I am a black man. And they built this match up. The match itself, the finish, it was an overbooked mess of interference. Like a whole bunch of people ran in. I don't even think the match went a full 10 minutes. It really wasn't anything special. But the fans were into Truth. They were more into him than they were Shamrock. After the match was over, Jeff Jarrett came out. He said that he had waited patiently for his title shot, but now the answer had become as white as his skin. He claimed reverse discrimination. He said, just because I'm not black, Puerto Rican, or Hawaiian, I have been denied this opportunity at the NWA World Heavyweight title. Reverse discrimination. Killings would hold that title for just over 100 days before losing it to Jarrett in November of that year. 7 years ago this week, on the August 7th, 2014 episode of TNA Impact, Bully Ray put TNA President Dixie Carter through a table in a segment taped weeks earlier, much to the delight of the crowd in New York City. TNA had taped a total of 11 shows at the Manhattan Center over the course of it was either June to September or July to September. They taped a whole bunch of shows, a whole bunch of television hours. They taped it at the Hammerstein, not the Hammerstein, it was at the Manhattan Center. Those of you who have been to the building, you know when you first enter, that first level, that's the Hammerstein Ballroom. They could fit about 2,500 people in there. They were upstairs on the 8th floor. That's the Grand Ballroom. That's where WWE used to tape Monday Night Raw in the early days in 93. Many a time I've been to Ring of Honor shows and Impact as well. in that building, and they have one little tiny elevator that fits like 4 people. So every time I would go to a show upstairs in the Grand Ballroom, it's just everybody making a mad dash up 8 flights of stairs. And as you would imagine, there's a lot of fans up there who are heaving and doubled over by the time they get to the top. That was never me, I'm proud to say. I was not breathing as heavily as some of these other people were. So I usually made it to the top first, and then, you kind of go, and it's just a great setting for a wrestling show. I always thought it was a great setting. I always had fun anytime I went there for any kind of show, for whatever promotion. And I was in attendance for some of these shows. I was not in the building for the angle with Dixie going through the table, but they aired stuff on this show. Once it aired on TV, they aired stuff on that show that I definitely was there for. So they pieced things together from different tapings. There was stuff out of order. It was weird the way that they edited these shows and put them together. And so I even got some screen time after Samoa Joe's X Division Championship win over Low Ki and Seiya Sanada. There I am chanting Joe, 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 which I'll be doing here from home when he returns to the ring for TakeOver in a few weeks. Bram beat Abyss in a Monsters Ball match. MVP was out here, putting over Bobby Lashley as the world champion. Some things never change. The entire show, though, was built around the hashtag #ItHappens. They were spoiling their own result. They were spoiling the fact, they were not hiding it, that Dixie Carter was going through this table. Bully Ray had promised it. He had been talking about it and teasing it for weeks and weeks and weeks. I am going to put this woman through a table, one way or another. So they banked on the fact that we'll just tell people it happened. We'll show little snippets in the commercial to tease them. And we'll try to pop a number for the actual show once it airs. So they were going crazy with this hashtag, this #ItHappens hashtag on social media. This was during Dixie's heel phase. This was the Dixieland phase. Bully Ray had made it his personal mission to put her through a table, and he did. And the place popped. So did her back. She broke 2 bones in her lower back on that spot. And they used it as a way to write her character off of television. I'm not sure she ever came back after that. And I used to do a little segment on the podcast here called Say Something Nice About Impact.
Say something nice about Impact.
There you go. I will say something nice about those days of Impact. I had a lot of fun at those tapings, I will say. Any Impact show that I ever attended live, and I never went to a pay-per-view, it was always television when they would come to New York City, I always had a good time. Same thing with Ring of Honor. And these tapings were no different. A lot of fun. And the first time I ever met Dixie Carter was not at these tapings in 2014. The first time I ever met Dixie Carter was the very first TNA show that I ever went to. The first time they came to New York City, I think it was their debut, was at Webster Hall in 2008. Webster Hall, anybody who lives in New York City, it's a dance club. It's got multiple levels. They have concerts there and stuff. So they had a show at Webster Hall, which is a very unique venue to have a wrestling event. And so I went with my brother and we bought tickets, and there was basically like a pit area where everybody was standing up like you would for a concert. But then the ring itself was up on an elevated platform. And there were only about 5 rows of seats around the ring up on that platform, and I paid for tickets to sit in one of those 5 rows. So I had just a great seat, right? And we get to the venue, and it had been a long time since I had been to Webster Hall. I'm looking around. I have no idea where we're supposed to go. I have no idea where our seats are. I'm looking around. They don't have anybody there really to help you out and tell you where you're supposed to go. I look over and I see this woman, and it's just this attractive woman who's standing off to the side. She's wearing, these jeans. She looks like a fan. She's not dressed in a suit or a blazer or anything like that. I said, maybe she can help me. Yeah, maybe she's sitting in the same section with us. I didn't know. So I go over and I say, excuse me, ma'am. And I'm asking her, I show her my ticket. I say, do you have any idea where we're supposed to go? And she's very nice. And she's got that southern charm to her. And she tells me, oh, yeah, you're sitting right up there. You got a great seat. And she's very nice lady. And I thank her and I go on my way. And I notice, like, midway through the show, I look up And it's almost, I don't even know how you would describe it. There's an area, they might have been producing the show from there. But I could kind of look up in the balcony, and there's almost like a little studio area. And I look up through the glass, and I see she's up there. And that's when I realized that she worked for the company. I didn't find out until later on that she friggin' owned the company. I had no idea. So that was my brief interaction with TNA President Dixie Carter. Say what you want to about the woman, but she was very nice to me in helping me to my seat that night. So anyway, those are the good days of Impact. I do miss those days. It was many years ago, but I was covering Impact more often back then. My live experiences, I have no complaints about that. It was always a good time. That same day, August 7, 2014, okay, that same day, Alberto Del Rio was fired by WWE after an incident backstage at catering at a show days earlier. WWE.com had the announcement, WWE announced the release of Alberto Del Rio due to unprofessional conduct and an altercation with an employee. And what happened is, he had slapped Cody Barbieri, who was WWE's manager of social media live events. That was his title. According to reports at that time, it did occur in catering. Somebody made a comment to Barbieri about not cleaning off his plate in catering. And I guess in his mind as a joke, he said, well, that's Del Rio's job. It's Alberto's job to clean the plates here. Now, Alberto was not present at the moment that he made the joke, but it got back to him. So he confronted Cody and said he didn't appreciate the remark. He wanted him to apologize. So there was different stories going around about what happened next. One pretty consistent story is that the people who worked for the company, a lot of the talent there, they didn't like this Cody Barbieri guy very much. They thought that he was full of himself, and that he just, the way he carried himself and the way he conducted himself, he had it coming. They weren't exactly devastated that somebody ended up smacking the shit out of this guy. But that's what happened. The story is that he slapped the shit out of this person who fell to the floor. And the fact that they fired him wasn't even so much that he slapped him, but it was more in how hard he slapped him and how intense the slapping was. Now, according to those who talked to Del Rio after the fact, he was told after the incident that he was going to be suspended for a little while, just past SummerSlam. But that what happened is that Barbieri threatened to sue WWE. And at that point, the feeling was that for legal reasons, they had no choice but to let him go. So Paul Levesque, Triple H, was the one who called him up on August 7th and gave him the bad news, and Del Rio was absolutely infuriated when he found out that they were firing him. And what was so bizarre about this is that WWE on their official Twitter account, you know how, mundane their tweets are when they make these announcements. I mean, they're very clinical. Whenever they announce a release or something on their social media, it's a very basic, prepared statement. There were 2 tweets posted to the WWE official Twitter account, which are still there. They were not deleted later on. They're still up on the official Twitter account. And mind you, this is the department that Barbieri would have been in charge of. When the news broke that Del Rio was fired, a lot of people were in his camp. They thought it was wrong for the company to fire him. This guy had made a racial joke, which was very inappropriate. Del Rio had every right to be upset. Now, we know that Del Rio is a dipshit, and he's done a lot of stupid stuff since then, but I will say, I can completely understand why Del Rio would feel the way that he did and would want to smack the crap out of this guy. Now, you have to be a professional. You can't just go around smacking people. But I can completely understand why he would feel that way. And you know what? This idiot, he had it coming. So a lot of the sympathy was really going towards Del Rio, right, among the fans. All of a sudden, on their official Twitter account, the first tweet pops up. They tag Del Rio in it. @Viva Del Rio is responsible for his own actions. If you're angry at anyone, be angry at Alberto. The second tweet said, there's no excuse for a pro athlete not to conduct themselves in a professional manner. So it was very strange that they would put these two tweets up, and Triple H even retweeted them. So it's not like, they didn't want people to see these tweets, or like I said, they took them down later. They're still up to this very day. Very, very unlike what you would normally expect to see tweeted from that. It's almost like Cody Barbieri tweeted it out himself. I wouldn't be surprised if he did. But just a couple of months later, PW Insider posted this. WWE placed a job posting online seeking a manager social media for the company. This was the job title that Cody Barbieri, the employee who had issues with Alberto Del Rio that led to Del Rio's release, had held. In checking with WWE sources this evening, we are told that Barbieri left the company earlier this month. The circumstances of his departure are not known. He had been with the company since September of 2012. He is now working as an independent social media consultant. So he ended up being gone from the company himself, and it was about a year later that Del Rio returned to WWE, inexplicably with Zeb Coulter as his manager, which even Coulter and Del Rio didn't understand. This was a Vince McMahon call, because of course it was. This was a Vince McMahon call that only he could decipher. They didn't last very long together. And 1 year ago this week, on August 3rd, 2020, two of WWE's biggest creative blunders debuted on the very same night, on Monday Night Raw. One was a new concept by the name of Raw Underground, and the other was a new faction by the name of Retribution. I wrote this in my description for Sound Off 664 that week. Boy, did I have a ball talking about this. This is what I wrote in my description of the episode on Apple. WWE panics over failing TV ratings and brings back Shane McMahon for its new Raw Underground concept and a new Ninja Nexus faction with chainsaws called Retribution invades SmackDown. One idea has short-term potential if done right, while the other, as it was presented, is pure garbage. That about sums it up. Even a year later, that about sums it up. Retribution was never not garbage. And Raw Underground did have potential. This was Shane McMahon's version, basically, of Fight Club, and this was said to be an actual Shane McMahon idea. This was like their version of Fight Club. This was just a segment they would cut to during the show. They had a ring with no ropes set up in a different part of the building. It was dingy and dark and dirty, and they had a bunch of nameless wrestlers surrounding the ring, pounding on the mat and banging on the mat. This is where Commander Aziz, before he became Commander Aziz, they had him, Omos, right, before he linked up with AJ Styles. He was the doorman. He would basically just man the door for anybody who wanted to come on in to Raw Underground. The idea had potential. They actually could have gotten people over with it if they actually gave a shit. All it was, though, was it was an attempt to just drum up interest in the show and drive the ratings up a little bit. There was never any real extensive thought put into how they can utilize this. So it never really stood a chance because Vince McMahon obviously never really believed in it. It was just some short-term thing. All right, let's try something different, right? Nothing wrong with trying something different. Keyword there is try. They didn't try. They did something different, but they didn't really try. So it failed. It lasted maybe a couple months and then it was gone. But in the other big angle, WWE.com posted this earlier in the day. WWE has learned that a new faction is arriving on Raw tonight. The superstars comprising this faction have yet to be revealed, but rumblings around the WWE Performance Center say that the group is out to cause chaos and shake up the organizational structure. What does this alliance have in store for the Red Brand? Find out tonight on Raw. What they did was, we had flickering lights throughout the show, inside the Performance Center. The audio would cut in and out. Security camera footage later revealed a group of 5 mystery bandits dressed in ninja-like outfits. They were basically wearing black ski masks. But they looked like ninjas. Out in the parking lot, throwing Molotov cocktails at a power generator outside the Performance Center. Had they actually succeeded in knocking the show off the air and knocking the power out, they would have been huge baby faces. But they failed. Which didn't stop them from celebrating and from jumping up and down before running away. They literally looked like fucking children who had just egged someone's house in their Halloween costumes. And we were supposed to take this group seriously. This was later revealed to be the group led by Mustafa Ali. We had Mace, the former Dio Madden, who was an announcer on Raw for a cup of coffee before that came to an end. T-Bar, the former Donovan Dijakovic, or Dominic Dijakovic, whatever the fuck they were calling him. He'll always be Donovan Dijak to me. Slapjack, Shane Thorne. Reckoning, which was Mia Yim. And Retaliation, who was initially in the group, Mercedes Martinez, who had enough sense once she realized what a shit show this thing was, to say, fuck this, I want to go back to NXT. She probably gave them some lame family excuse, but believe me, she's a smart woman. She saw this and she ran the other way. And they sent her back to NXT. Although now, of everybody in this group, she's the only one who's no longer employed. Maybe she would have still been employed had she allowed them to ruin her career with this awful faction. Mia Yim isn't even on television anymore, but at least she still has a job. But that was Retribution. That was the beginning of Retribution, one of the worst factions in WWE history. 2 ideas like that landing in the same night, that's rare. I mean, you could have one really bad idea, but to have 2? That takes talent. And that is this week in wrestling history.